The plastic strip slid across the polished mahogany table with a dry, sharp hiss, stopping an inch from my coffee cup. It was too stiff, the silver fibers of the container liner still clinging to the sticky adhesive along the edge. I stared down at the red temperature indicator, my fingers tightening against the cold chrome arm of the chair while the stale scent of burnt office coffee hung heavy in the room. At 33, as the Senior Director of Global Cold Chain Quality for Helixor Therapeutics, I knew every standard component we used. This one was wrong. The serial number stamped into the housing had been scraped away halfway down, leaving a raw, jagged notch of exposed metal. Lydia Crane leaned forward, her expression locked into that cold, professional mask she wore whenever she prepared to ruin someone. "Your little side business seems to have leaked into our supply chain, Paige," she said, her voice dropping to an even, dangerous tone. Grant Huxley didn't even look at the sensor. The chief operating officer leaned back in his leather chair, tapping a gold pen against his notepad with a steady, rhythmic tap that echoed in the quiet conference room. "We are terminating your contract effective immediately, Paige," Grant said, his smile entirely too smooth for a man firing someone over a critical safety deviation. "HR received a compliance report this morning detailing how you used your outside venture to plant unauthorized monitoring devices in our shipping containers." Outside the glass wall of the conference room, 3 department managers stopped walking, their eyes darting toward us before they quickly looked away. They could not hear the words, but they could read the shape of the room. Grant wanted an audience. He wanted everyone to see that the person who kept demanding temperature compliance for our children's oncology drugs was gone. Lydia slid a thick manila folder across the table, right on top of the red sensor. "There is a severance agreement here, along with an admission of misconduct," she said. "Sign it, and we will refrain from pursuing criminal charges for data theft." My chest tightened, but I kept my breathing steady. I could see the glow of Grant's laptop screen through the angle of the hinge, displaying a pending notification that made my stomach drop. Release authorization pending for the Arden distribution hub lot. They were not just firing me. They were clearing the board so they could push a compromised batch of Lumenza out the door before anyone could quarantine it. "You are finished here," Grant laughed, crossing his arms over his expensive suit. I looked from the red strip of plastic to Grant's self-satisfied grin, and then back to Lydia, quiet, predatory posture. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask them to listen to reason. I simply stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. "You are right," I said, letting the words settle into the heavy air of the room. "I should focus on my business." Grant blinked, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "What did you say?" "You heard me," I replied, turning toward the door. Security guards were already waiting in the hallway, their hands resting near their utility belts as if I were a threat, instead of the person who had spent 5 years keeping their medications safe. When the taller guard reached for my company badge, I pointed down at the table. "That red sensor is evidence," I said, my voice cutting through the silence of the corridor. "It belongs in a sealed evidence bag, not tossed into a paper folder." Lydia didn't blink. She reached out and picked up the sensor with her bare fingers, dropping it carelessly into a plain manila envelope. I noticed the faint smudge of pink lipstick on the paper flap. She touched the physical chain of custody with complete disregard, proving she had no intention of letting an investigation happen. She just wanted the object hidden. I walked out past the row of empty desks, noticing immediately who was missing. Monica Price's desk was completely cleared, her nameplate removed from the door. When I tried to catch the eye of a junior analyst by the water cooler, she turned around and pretended to adjust her glasses. Monica had been placed on administrative leave 20 minutes before my meeting, hauled away to ensure nobody in quality was left to object. Grant had cleaned house before he pulled the trigger. The glass doors of the Helixor lobby slammed shut behind me, trapping the climate-controlled air inside while the autumn wind hit my face with a sharp, biting chill. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my personal phone, just as it started vibrating against my palm. The screen displayed Lucas' name. I answered it immediately, standing beside my car in the empty parking lot. "Paige," Lucas said, skipping any greeting. His voice was tight, clipped through the speaker. "Helixor just revoked our authorized quality account, right in the middle of your open critical deviation." "I know," I said, unlocking the car door. "They fired me." "That is not all," Lucas continued, his breath catching slightly. "Under our contract, revoking an active monitoring account during an open deviation automatically triggers a system-wide legal hold. It freezes every byte of raw data on our end and pings the insurer and the audit committee. Which lot? I asked, my hand freezing on the steering wheel. I cannot tell you the lot number, Lucas said, his tone dropping into strict professional compliance. You were recused from Helixor data feeds when you signed the conflict management plan. You have no right to access the server right now. Lucas, people are about to receive medication that never should have left the warehouse, I said, the urgency bleeding into my voice despite my best efforts. I am bound by the system rules, Paige, Lucas answered firmly, protecting both of us from any claim of collusion. I cannot open the files for you, but I can read you the automated warning the system just generated. I leaned against the side of the car, watching the glass windows of the Helixor building reflect the gray afternoon sky. Read it. One of the monitored shipment reports contains a duplicate data signature, Lucas read slowly, the words carrying an unmistakable weight across the line. The temperature curve was copied from another file. I looked back up at the corporate headquarters, watching the faint shadow of a security camera pan slowly across the brick facade. The pieces clicked into place with sudden, terrifying clarity. They hadn't found my business. They had stepped directly into the trap that was built to catch them. Then the red strip was not evidence against me, I said, whispering the words into the cold air. It was evidence against them. My car heater struggled against the autumn chill, but my hands remained cold, gripping the steering wheel. My personal phone vibrated in the cup holder, rattling loudly against the hard plastic. I picked it up and saw the termination email from Human Resources sitting at the top of my inbox. Before I could even finish reading the standard legal threats, a text message popped up from a coworker I still trusted. She had sent a quick photograph of a company-wide memo. I zoomed in on the bright screen. The text was brief and devastating. A senior quality employee was terminated today after an undisclosed external business created a serious data integrity concern. Grant was not wasting a single second. He had branded me a corporate thief and a liar before I even drove out of the parking lot. He was controlling the narrative, making sure anyone who spoke to me would be treated as an accomplice. I put the car in drive and headed straight to my apartment. Once inside, I ignored the blinking light on my answering machine and went right to the hall closet. The heavy fireproof lockbox sat on the bottom shelf. The metal latch felt ice-cold under my fingers as I snapped it open. Inside, smelling faintly of cedar and old ink, was my personal employment archive. I flipped through the stiff manila folders until I found my original conflict management plan from 5 years ago. My signature sat right next to the distinctive blue ink scrawl belonging to Margaret Hale, the chair of the audit committee. The document clearly stated I owned Blue Lantern Trace, but surrendered all operational control to my business partner. It strictly forbade me from accessing Helixor data through the vendor system. I traced the signature with my thumb. My business was not a secret at all. Somebody had simply deleted the digital record from the human resources system to make it look like one. 20 minutes later, I pushed open the heavy glass door of the small commercial office that housed Blue Lantern. The low hum of cooling servers filled the room, a steady background noise that usually brought me peace. Lucas sat behind a wall of monitors, his fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard. He stopped typing the second I walked in. "You cannot look at the screens, Paige," Lucas said, spinning his chair around to physically block my view of the raw data. "A child could receive a compromised oncology drug by tomorrow morning," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. "And if I let you look at the raw data, Grant will tell the board you manipulated the system to frame him," Lucas countered. His posture was rigid, his expression offering no compromise. "The insurer loss control program is the only reason we have this data. We placed secondary sensors on random shipments for independent auditing. You do not get to see which ones. That blind spot is the exact thing proving you did not manufacture this crisis." I closed my eyes and let out a slow, ragged breath. My partner was right. If I broke the chain of custody now, I would destroy our only weapon. A heavy knock on the front door made us both jump. A courier in a gray uniform stood on the welcome mat, holding a stiff cardboard envelope. He asked for my signature, handed over the package, and walked away without a single word. I tore the cardboard open. The thick bond paper inside bore the Helixor legal letterhead. It was a formal cease and desist order from Lydia Crane, demanding the immediate destruction of all stolen proprietary data. She threatened a criminal referral and a court injunction if we did not comply. But Lydia had made a careless mistake. I looked at the tiny metadata stamp printed in the bottom corner of the footer. "This document version was created 3 days ago," I said, sliding the paper across the desk for Lucas to see. Lydia drafted my termination letter and the data destruction order before I even opened the critical deviation. They never investigated anything. The verdict was written before the crime even happened. I pulled out my laptop, scanned the physical conflict disclosure, and drafted a secure message to the independent corporate ethics hotline. I bypassed Helixor management entirely and directed the evidence straight to the audit committee. Just as I hit send, a sharp warning chime echoed from the workstation behind Lucas. An executive from Helixor Operations just submitted an emergency override request, Lucas said, his eyes scanning the new alert flashing in red. They are demanding the insurer lift the legal hold. Their justification states the employee misconduct has been fully resolved. Another chime followed immediately after. A distribution network update flashed on a separate monitor, showing a change in the shipping inventory. Lucas went perfectly still. The Arden Hub lot you quarantined just changed status, he told me, his voice barely above a whisper. It is now marked as available for use. I checked the clock on the wall. Less than 6 hours had passed since the power failed at the warehouse. They did not wait for an investigation, I said, grabbing my coat. They released it. I sat in the driver's seat of my car and dialed the insurer hotline. The number had been burned into my memory since the day I signed the conflict management plan. A representative answered on the second ring. I provided the reference code for the open deviation and formally requested a temporary stop ship order pending an audit committee review. Are you reporting a spoiled product? The representative asked, her keyboard clacking faintly in the background. I am reporting a potentially compromised batch, I clarified, making sure to keep my voice steady. The lot was never properly evaluated, and we have reason to believe the internal release records were altered. The representative logged my retaliation concern but refused to confirm any data. Before I could press harder, my phone vibrated against my palm. A trusted colleague had just forwarded a video file from the internal corporate network. I opened the attachment. Grant stood at the podium in the main atrium, addressing an all-hands meeting. The chief operating officer looked appropriately grave, projecting the perfect image of a concerned leader. A terminated employee secretly planted her own monitoring devices in our shipments, Grant told the crowd. She tried to manufacture a false alarm, hoping to terrify the company into buying her services. Quality has reviewed the data and cleared the product for use. My jaw ached. The man was using my exact job title against me, while carefully avoiding the name of the person who supposedly signed the release authorization. I scanned the pixelated crowd in the video, searching for Monica Price. The chief quality officer was nowhere to be seen. I hung up with the insurer and immediately dialed Monica on her personal cell. She picked up after 4 rings, breathing heavily as if she had been pacing. Grant placed me on administrative leave, Monica said before I could even say hello. Corporate disabled my digital signature an hour ago, and my lawyer told me to stop talking to anyone from the office. Did you authorize the Arden lot release? I asked, needing to hear it directly from her. Monica let out a dry, bitter laugh. I was not even in the building, Paige. The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen, processing the impossible reality. Someone had used her electronic signature through a service account while she was completely off-site. Another notification flashed across my display. A text message arrived from an unknown number containing only 2 short sentences. I kept one. Do not call. I recognized the area code. It belonged to Ethan Cole, the warehouse supervisor who managed the quarantine zone at the Arden distribution hub. The man was the only person with the physical access required to remove a temperature logger. The message made my stomach twist. Ethan was not just a witness. He had actively participated in the cover-up. A sharp tap on my car window made me jump. Lucas stood outside, holding a printed photograph. He passed the paper through the cracked window. The insurer just shared this security still with the independent counsel, Lucas explained, his breath pluming in the cold autumn air. I studied the grainy image. The hallway camera had captured Ethan walking into the executive suite holding a small canvas pouch. A few minutes later, the supervisor walked out clutching a thick paper envelope. It looked exactly like a payoff. But my eyes drifted to the background. Lydia stood near the filing cabinets, holding a familiar manila envelope with a faint pink smudge on the flap. The exact envelope containing the red sensor from my termination meeting. Lucas checked his vibrating phone. He answered, listened for a few seconds, and closed his eyes. The independent ethics hotline just confirmed the pallets left the distribution hub, Lucas said, resting his hand on the roof of my car. A shipment was just scanned at a pediatric hospital. It is now sitting in their active inventory. I pulled up the hospital supply network on my phone. The screen loaded a digital manifest for the compromised lot. A single line of text rested below the serial number, stating the medicine was scheduled for pediatric oncology use tomorrow morning. I looked at the digital clock on my dashboard, calculating the hours we had left. By the time the board finishes protecting itself, I whispered, staring at the screen, a child could receive the first dose. The vinyl booth at the highway diner stuck to my heavy coat. Nora Whitman slid a thick canvas pouch across the laminated table. The independent counsel hired by the audit committee did not waste time with pleasantries. "Drop your phones inside," Nora instructed, her voice holding the quiet authority of a courtroom veteran. "We are not creating any opportunity for defense lawyers to claim witness tampering or illegal recording." I dropped my device into the signal-blocking bag, and Lucas did the same. The diner door chimed. Ethan Cole stepped inside, his shoulders hunched against the biting wind. The warehouse supervisor scanned the room twice before sliding into the booth next to me. His hands trembled as he reached for a paper napkin. "I changed the sensor," Ethan said, ripping the thin paper into tiny pieces. The admission dropped like a stone, heavy and final. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to remain completely still. "Grant brought a replacement device down to the loading dock and told me to swap it out," the man continued, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. "Lydia Crane drafted a retention agreement. She said if I signed a statement claiming you ordered the swap, I could keep my job and my daughter would keep her medical insurance. If I refused, they would open a corporate integrity investigation and fire me for cause." That thick envelope in the security footage was not cash, it was blackmail. "Did you give Grant the original logger?" Nora asked, her tone entirely neutral. Ethan shook his head, pulling a heavy plastic freezer bag from his coat pocket. "I gave him an expired unit from the scrap bin because he did not know the difference." The supervisor pushed the bag across the table. It contained a standard temperature logger, 3 printed photographs, and a handwritten log signed by a second warehouse worker. "I needed insurance," Ethan whispered, "in case Grant tried to bury me anyway." I leaned closer to examine the clear plastic. The serial number stamped on the metal housing perfectly matched the missing sequence from the red adhesive strip Lydia had dropped on the conference room table. The red strip was just the external indicator, physically binding the shipping container to the primary logger hidden inside. Lydia had used that piece of plastic to accuse me, completely unaware she was holding the direct physical link to the tampered shipment. "This chain of custody is compromised," Nora stated, examining the makeshift evidence bag without touching it. "You held this outside the official secure protocols, so we will need security badge logs and camera footage to support it in a hearing." The lawyer looked directly at Ethan. "You must sign an affidavit and surrender this logger to a forensic courier tonight." "Will they arrest me?" the supervisor asked, his voice cracking on the last word. "I cannot promise you immunity," Nora replied softly, refusing to offer a false comfort. "But cooperation is your only defense now." We left the diner and retrieved our phones from the canvas bag. Lucas immediately connected a secure audio call to Maya Patel in the quality control laboratory. The scientist had spent the last 2 hours analyzing the restricted summary data provided by the insurer. 3 different shipping reports share the exact same temperature curve, Maya explained, the audio crackling slightly over the car speaker. The lines match minute by minute, including an 8-second signal dropout at midnight. In real-world logistics, 3 separate containers will never produce identical digital fingerprints. "What about the third report?" I asked, watching the highway traffic blur past my windshield. Maya paused, the silence stretching for 3 long seconds. "I checked the metadata for that specific container," she finally said. "It never passed through the Arden distribution hub during the power failure. It was a control shipment traveling on a completely different route." The report attached to the ruined medicine was not just altered. Someone had deliberately copied a clean record to hide a catastrophic failure. The shipment that proved the fraud was the one shipment that never failed. The secure conference call connected just after midnight. Nora Whitman controlled the virtual room, keeping Margaret Hale and the insurer representative on mute until the evidence was properly displayed. I sat beside Lucas in the Blue Lantern office, listening to the heavy hum of the cooling towers outside. Maya Patel initiated the screen share. The quality control scientist pulled up the control shipment record. "Those are dummy units," Maya explained, her voice echoing slightly over the speaker. That container traveled on a completely different route and never passed through the Arden warehouse during the power outage. Our independent raw data confirms a perfectly stable temperature, but the internal Helixor release report matches the failed Arden container exactly. A sharp notification tone interrupted the presentation. Lucas checked his secondary monitor and exhaled sharply. Lydia Crane just filed an emergency petition, my business partner announced. She is demanding we surrender the Blue Lantern servers under the claim of misappropriated trade secrets. Nora did not hesitate. We will establish a neutral forensic escrow, the attorney countered. Independent experts will create a read-only copy, apply a cryptographic hash, and seal the origin data. We only run a targeted signature search tonight, and full device attribution will wait until after the 48-hour deadline. I nodded, agreeing to surrender control of my own system. It was the only way to protect the chain of custody. Grant Huxley joined the audio bridge a moment later. The chief operating officer sounded entirely calm, offering no hostility. This looks like a simple software glitch on the vendor side, Grant suggested smoothly. We should pause any drastic actions to avoid unnecessary panic among the hospitals. Patient safety must come first. He used my core principle as a shield, but Maya was already highlighting specific lines of code on the shared screen. This is not a software error, the scientist stated. The copied report shares a precise rounding error, an identical 8-second gap, and the exact same device restart marker. Someone used a single legitimate export as a template, changed the lot number, and applied it to the compromised shipment. A heavy silence fell over the digital room. Margaret Hale finally unmuted her microphone. The chair of the audit committee sounded exhausted but resolute. I spent the last hour searching the physical archives, Margaret said. I found the original conflict management plan for Paige Keaton. It explicitly bars her from accessing Helixor data feeds. Lydia Crane completely removed this document from the Human Resources case file she sent me this morning. The chair paused, letting the implication settle. Nora, Margaret continued, you are officially authorized to open an independent investigation. The Blue Lantern servers remain under committee protection. 3 hours later, the independent forensic team completed their targeted search of the indexed archive. The lead investigator joined the call, rubbing his eyes under the harsh fluorescent lights of his own office. My team is working through the night, the expert warned. We will not have the full imaging done for days, but our preliminary signature search flagged more than just the Arden lot. He brought a new spreadsheet onto the screen. We found 6 historical batches over the last 3 years carrying this exact same data signature, the investigator revealed. Every single one was linked to a cold chain deviation that closed with unnatural speed. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. Grant had not just panicked and covered up a single mistake. He had built a reliable system for erasing failures. Nora placed a secondary document on the screen, aligning it directly beside the 6 flagged release dates. It was the corporate executive compensation calendar. Look at the timing, the attorney instructed quietly. 5 of those falsified releases happened exactly 1 week before the quarterly revenue snapshot. The 6th occurred just days before the board nominated Grant as the successor for chief executive officer. A massive product recall during any of those windows would have destroyed his performance metrics. I stared at the overlapping dates, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. The secret business they mocked was the only thing holding the true history of their actions. He was not protecting the medicine, I said, leaning closer to the microphone. He was protecting the number that paid him. Maya uploaded a new file to the secure bridge. The document header displayed a capital request from 3 years ago, detailing a critical upgrade for the Arden distribution hub cooling system. I recognized my own signature on the technical review line. Grant denied the funding 3 separate times, Maya explained, highlighting the rejection notes on the screen. He claimed the capital expenditure would lower the quarterly earnings metric. That money was eventually diverted to expand a display production line just in time for an investor presentation. He knowingly left the temperature controls vulnerable, I said, feeling the anger settle into a cold, hard knot in my chest. He risked the medication to protect his bonus payout. The lead forensic investigator cleared his throat over the audio feed. We have another problem, he warned. My team traced the final release authorization for the compromised lot. The system changes were executed through a generic operations service account, not a personal login. Lydia Crane immediately seized the opening. You cannot tie a shared service account to any single individual, the senior vice president of legal argued. her voice projecting sharp confidence. For all we know, Monica Price executed that release to help Paige manufacture this crisis. My hands curled into fists under the desk. Check the multi-factor authentication logs, I told the investigator. Every service login requires a secondary device ping. Find the location data. Keyboard clacks echoed through the speaker for several tense seconds. The investigator finally stopped typing. The authentication ping routed to a company-issued mobile device registered to the executive suite, he confirmed. Specifically, the phone belonging to the chief operating officer. Furthermore, Nora Whitman added, seamlessly taking control of the presentation, Monica Price was attending an off-site compliance seminar when her digital signature was applied to the release. Her service token was recreated by the technology department under an urgent business continuity ticket submitted by operations. Monica is completely cleared. The independent counsel pulled a fresh set of records from the corporate document archive. She shared her screen, revealing the digital properties of my termination letter. Lydia drafted the termination package 3 days ago, Nora stated. The lawyer pointed to a second timestamp. She also created a secure network folder titled Blue Lantern Narrative on Tuesday morning, before Human Resources interviewed a single witness. The goal was never an investigation. It was a targeted elimination. A low murmur broke out among the audit committee members. The board was fracturing. Some directors were terrified of the plunging stock price, while others whispered about quietly buying Blue Lantern to bury the evidence. Grant was already preparing a public statement blaming the crisis on a rogue vendor, using the corporate confusion to stall any definitive action. The insurer representative suddenly cut through the noise. "We just received an inventory update from the pediatric network," the woman announced, her tone stripping all the air from the room. The compromised Arden lot was transferred from the holding cooler to the active pharmacy. I pulled the network tracker up on my monitor. The screen showed the receiving pharmacist, Hannah Moore, logging the boxes for the morning preparation cycle. "Why hasn't the hospital received the stop-use notice?" Margaret Hale demanded. "Grant sent a conflicting quality-cleared message across the internal network," Nora answered. "The hospital has 2 contradictory directives, and they are defaulting to the executive authorization. The audit committee can override him with an emergency vote, but we need a clear majority. Right now, we are short 1 director." I stared at the blinking cursor on the inventory screen. Time was no longer a theoretical concept measured in digital records. It was a physical reality playing out in a hospital pharmacy miles away. "How long until the preparation cycle begins?" I asked. Nora checked her phone. "The pharmacy starts drawing the morning doses in exactly 90 minutes. The line went dead quiet. Grant was currently calling the remaining board members individually, weaponizing their fear of liability to prevent the final vote. We had to convince the last director that waiting for more information was not an act of caution. It was an active decision to release a broken product. Nora Whitman patched the final audit committee member into our secure line. The former hospital administrator sounded deeply frustrated, his heavy sighs clipping the microphone. He feared a false alarm would create a critical shortage of pediatric oncology medication. I did not raise my voice, and I did not claim the drug was definitely ruined. "Listen to the physical evidence," I told the committee member. "The safety investigation remains incomplete. The release report is a confirmed duplicate, and the authorizing signature is invalid. The safest clinical choice right now is a temporary hold, not a permanent conclusion." Before he could respond, a new alert chimed across the corporate network. Grant had just blasted an all-clear bulletin to every connected pharmacy. Lydia attached a legal rider to his message, labeling any further warnings as unauthorized communication from a terminated employee. The hospital staff now held 2 completely contradictory directives. Nora did not argue with the executives. The independent counsel simply projected the control shipment data onto the virtual screen, placing it directly next to the falsified release record. The visual proof was undeniable, and the final vote flipped immediately. The insurer triggered the official stop-use notice through the distribution channel. We sat in agonizing silence for 10 long minutes. Finally, Nora received a direct call from the hospital compliance office. Hannah Moore, the receiving pharmacist, had intercepted the routine order right as her staff prepared to pull the vials from the holding cooler. "Not a single dose was administered," Nora announced, setting her phone face down on the table. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 30 hours. Nora passed me a sterile hand wipe. The sharp smell of rubbing alcohol filled the small office. instantly pulling me back to a sterile hospital room many years ago. My sister had deserved a system that caught mistakes before they reached her bedside. Today, that system finally worked. But the quiet moment shattered when Lucas tapped his monitor. Ethan Cole had just forwarded a frantic text message from the Arden warehouse. Operations just issued a routine disposal order for all expired temperature readers, Lucas read, the color draining from his face. Legal approved it 10 minutes ago. Nora immediately drafted a formal preservation mandate, but the damage was already in motion. Corporate security accessed the warehouse cameras, only to find the specific lens covering the equipment aisle had lost its signal. When the feed finally reconnected, the disposal bin was completely empty. Grant sent a follow-up email to the board, claiming the missing hardware proved Ethan and I had stolen company property to manufacture the crisis. Ethan panicked on our secure audio bridge, his voice cracking with pure terror. The physical logger was perfectly safe with the forensic courier, but the red indicator strip connecting that logger to the shipping container was still inside the Helixor building. "Let them claim the hardware is gone," Nora said, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she requested security logs from the executive floor. "Grant is focusing on the warehouse, but he forgot who drafted your termination paperwork." A grainy security image loaded onto the main monitor. The timestamp showed the exact minute my firing concluded. Lydia Crane was walking out of the Human Resources file room, heading directly toward her private office. She held a plain manila envelope in her right hand. Nora zoomed in on the image, enhancing the resolution just enough to reveal a faint pink lipstick smudge on the paper flap. The senior vice president of legal had not deposited the red sensor in the secure evidence locker. She had carried it away herself. "If that strip is still in her office," Nora observed quietly, "she concealed physical evidence. If the envelope is gone, she destroyed it." I stared at the compromised lawyer on the screen, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. "Either way," I replied, keeping my eyes on the pink smudge. She just chose her side. Lydia Crane joined the audit committee audio bridge, sounding exactly like a woman who still believed she controlled the room. The senior vice president of legal cited attorney-client privilege, politely instructing Nora Whitman to route all document preservation requests through her specific office. Nora did not argue the law. The independent counsel simply pulled rank. "You are officially the subject of an active investigation," Nora stated, her tone flat and uncompromising. "You do not dictate document retention, and your administrative access is now suspended." Before the lawyer could formulate a response, Margaret Hale muted her line. The committee chair had already authorized corporate security to enter the executive suite. I watched the live security feed on Lucas' monitor. 2 guards unlocked the heavy oak door of the legal department, bypassing the standard filing cabinets to focus on the locked bottom drawer of the mahogany desk. A specialized technician defeated the physical lock in under 3 minutes. Inside, sitting neatly on top of a drafted termination package, rested the manila envelope with the pink lipstick smudge. The lead security officer held it up to the camera and carefully extracted the red temperature indicator strip. Its torn edge and partial serial number caught the fluorescent light. The hardware had never been logged into the secure evidence locker, and no transfer record existed. Our forensic team finished their targeted sweep of the Human Resources server right as the guards secured the envelope. The lead investigator unmuted his microphone to share a system log, explaining exactly how my conflict disclosure had seemingly vanished. Lydia had not deleted the original file from the secure repository because she lacked the digital permissions to do so. Instead, the lawyer had manually removed the hypertext link bridging the document to my employee profile. "She deliberately broke the interface," the investigator said, tracking a cursor across the screen. "Anyone looking at the Human Resources system would only see a blank page. She took a screenshot of that empty interface and inserted it directly into the termination memo." Nora layered another file onto the presentation. The metadata attached to my termination letter, the public talking points, and the cease and desist order painted a damning picture. Every single document was fully drafted before Human Resources interviewed a single witness. The legal department had not investigated a safety failure. They had simply constructed a narrative and manufactured the interface required to support it. When Nora presented these findings in a private breakout room, Lydia immediately dropped her loyal facade. The lawyer claimed Grant had lied to her regarding the severity of the temperature deviation. She offered full cooperation in exchange for preserving her severance package and avoiding a professional conduct report. Nora remained silent for several seconds before placing a single recovered email on the screen. The forensic team had pulled it from the deleted server cache. Remove her before quality elevates the excursion, the message read. Once her access is gone, we can close the event as employee manipulation. The sender was Lydia, and the recipient was Grant. That was standard risk management advice, the lawyer insisted. Although the smooth authority had completely vanished from her voice, Nora shook her head. You drafted a fake legal hold, authorized the destruction of physical hardware, and locked a critical piece of evidence in your personal desk drawer. Those actions are not legal advice. They are active obstruction. Margaret Hale rejoined the breakout session a moment later. The committee chair announced the full board of directors would convene in exactly 6 hours. Grant had specifically requested my presence, demanding that I answer for my unauthorized vendor company. The chief operating officer still believed he could convince the room that I was a greedy saboteur. Do you want me to speak for you? Nora asked gently, offering a professional shield. I looked at the overwhelming pile of digital evidence we had gathered over the last 42 hours. I will answer them myself, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. But I will only speak to the physical proof. Just before I logged off to prepare for the final confrontation, Nora held up a standard transparent evidence bag to her webcam. The red plastic strip rested safely inside, fully logged and legally secured. He thinks this piece of plastic proves you planted the crisis, the attorney reminded me softly. I remembered the way Grant had laughed when he fired me, and a quiet calm finally settled into my bones. Then let him put it on the table one more time, I replied. The digital door to the boardroom opened. Grant projected a slide, showing the Blue Lantern corporate structure onto the massive boardroom screen. The chief operating officer pointed a laser pointer directly at my name, sweeping the red dot back and forth. She built a competing venture and used it to manufacture a crisis, Grant told the board, his voice thick with practiced concern. When human resources confronted her, she explicitly stated she wanted to focus on her business. A business that profits directly from our supply chain failures. I stood up and smoothed the front of my blazer. Blue Lantern is my business, I said, keeping my tone perfectly even. That is the only true statement in his entire presentation. I slid my original conflict management plan across the heavy mahogany table. Margaret Hale adjusted her glasses and verified her own signature on the bottom line. The committee chair then explained exactly how Lydia Crane had intentionally hidden the disclosure from the human resources tracking file. The murmurs in the room shifted, and the polished executive mask on Grant's face slipped for a fraction of a second. I reached into my bag, pulled out a clear evidence pouch, and placed it right in the center of the table. The red temperature indicator strip sat inside, its jagged edge catching the overhead light. Grant let out a loud, dismissive laugh. A piece of broken plastic proves absolutely nothing, the executive sneered. The plastic is just the anchor, Nora Whitman replied. The independent counsel systematically laid out the calibration certificate, the installation photograph, and the warehouse scan logs. Finally, she placed a second evidence bag containing the original temperature logger Ethan Cole had surrendered. Maya Patel joined via the audio bridge, projecting the digital data curves onto the main screen. The quality control scientist displayed the control shipment directly next to the falsified release record. The software did not duplicate an export, Maya explained, her words precise and heavy. The forensic escrow confirms a manual file upload originating from a device registered to the executive suite. Nora did not give Grant time to formulate a new lie. She immediately displayed the delayed refrigeration capital requests next to the executive bonus calendar. Then came the final strike. The screen shifted to a recovered text message sent from Grant to the warehouse supervisor. Make the shipment match the release file before morning. When combined with the copied data and the bonus schedule, the ambiguous instruction transformed into a concrete directive to commit corporate fraud. The forensic expert unmuted his line. We have isolated 6 historical batches with the exact same duplicated data signature, he reported. The boardroom erupted into a chaotic chorus of panicked questions. Directors realized the scope involved multiple years of compromised oncology medication, massive financial restatements, and federal regulatory reporting. The insurer representative leaned into her microphone, stating clearly that liability coverage would be permanently suspended if the board did not take decisive action before the 48-hour deadline. Grant slammed his hand on the table. Lydia assured me the termination was legally sound, he shouted, his calm facade completely shattering. The senior vice president of legal shot out of her chair. You lied to me about the safety risks, Lydia fired back, pointing a trembling finger at him. Nora simply tapped her keyboard, bringing up Lydia's deleted email. Remove her before quality elevates the excursion. They stared at the screen, and then at each other, their defensive alliance collapsing entirely under the weight of their own written words. Margaret Hale called for an immediate vote. The board unanimously authorized a voluntary recall, reinstated Monica Price to lead the quality response, and directed outside counsel to begin formal self-reporting procedures. Security guards stepped into the room, moving quietly toward the two executives. They confiscated badges, corporate phones, and company laptops. Grant paused at the door, glaring at me with pure venom. "You just destroyed this company," he spat. "No," I replied, holding his gaze until he looked away. "I stopped you from hiding what you did to it." As the heavy doors closed behind them, Nora received a call on her secure line. The independent laboratory had just completed their preliminary screening of the historical reserve samples. The attorney listened for a moment, her expression growing incredibly grim. "The termination is over," Nora announced to the silent room. "Several historical samples just failed the degradation screening. The criminal investigation has officially begun." Several months after the recall, the dust finally started to settle across the corporate landscape. The compromised Arden lot never reached a single patient, and the hospitals received replacement stock through an emergency distribution plan. Helixor took a massive financial hit, but the doors stayed open. Grant had always claimed a safety delay would destroy the company, and that lie finally unraveled. The independent laboratory finished testing the historical reserve samples a few weeks later. Several vials showed severe degradation markers, proving the danger he covered up was completely real. Ethan Cole signed a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors. The former warehouse supervisor lost his management position and received strict probation in exchange for his testimony. Nobody treated him like a hero, yet keeping that original temperature logger kept him out of a federal cell. I accepted that outcome. Justice did not require crushing the weakest person in the chain of command, especially someone acting under direct threats to his family. Lydia Crane lost her professional mask completely. The state bar suspended her law license the moment she pleaded guilty to obstruction and making false statements. All those deleted links and fabricated legal holds secured her a real prison sentence, though slightly shorter than the one handed to her boss. During her final hearing, the woman who once weaponized corporate contracts sat quietly at the defendant table. She walked away with no severance and no career. Grant tried to blame his actions on a corporate culture of urgency, but the prosecution simply displayed his executive bonus calendar alongside the copied data. The judge handed down a multi-year federal prison sentence, ordered a complete clawback of his previous bonuses, and canceled his unvested stock. The healthcare industry banned him from management roles, and the pediatric charity quietly scrubbed his name from their donor walls. The restructured Helixor board eventually offered me the role of chief quality officer. Monica Price practically begged me to accept, insisting we could finally build the culture we always wanted. I turned the offer down. A higher title would not fix a room full of directors who only paid attention when their insurance coverage and stock prices were threatened. I returned to Blue Lantern Trace, stepping fully into the light as the public chief executive. We built a new governance board, bringing Monica on as an advisor after she legally transitioned out of Helixor. Our new platform allowed warehouse workers and quality analysts to report supply chain failures directly to independent servers, ensuring nobody could ever be locked out of their own safety data again. I sat in the back row of the federal courtroom during Grant's sentencing. The lead prosecutor laid a standard evidence bag on the heavy wooden table right in front of the defense. Inside rested the torn red temperature indicator strip. Grant stared at it for a long time. The man had once dismissed it as a useless piece of plastic, confident he could simply erase its meaning with a single human resources meeting. I felt the tension finally leave my shoulders. They fired me for a secret business, but Blue Lantern was never built to hide anything. I built it so powerful people could not make the truth disappear. 48 hours after they laughed, the board finally understood what my business was. I did not sell sensors. I preserved consequences. When you find yourself standing against a corporate system designed to protect the powerful, it is incredibly easy to feel completely alone. You might look at the polished executives sitting across the boardroom table, read their heavy legal threats, listen to their carefully crafted lies, and wonder if fighting back is even worth the personal cost. The story of that simple red temperature sensor reminds you that integrity is never just an abstract concept. It is a deliberate physical action. You cannot always stop greedy people from chasing their quarterly bonuses at the expense of others, and you might not be able to prevent a toxic leader from trying to rewrite reality to save their own lucrative career. But you can absolutely refuse to help them hide the damage. You can build your own firm boundaries, quietly document every single step, and wait for the exact right moment to hold them fully accountable. The truth is incredibly stubborn, and it only takes one person refusing to compromise to bring a towering house of cards crashing straight to the floor. Protecting vulnerable people is never a professional mistake, even if it costs you a comfortable position in the short term. Real power does not actually come from a corner office, a fancy title, or a massive severance package negotiated behind closed doors. It comes from the quiet certainty of knowing your actions preserved the safety of others. It comes from understanding that the consequences you ultimately delivered were earned by their own arrogance. You do not need to play their political games to win. You just need to ensure the truth survives long enough to be seen. Take a moment to think about your own professional journey. Have you ever faced a terrifying situation where you had to choose between doing the right thing and keeping your upper management happy? How did you handle the intense pressure when someone with significantly more authority tried to bend the rules or erase a critical mistake? Share your own experiences down in the comments section below. We read every single one, and your quiet act of courage might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to find their own strength.